The galaxy had grown used to silence from Earth. Across countless star systems, alien races sent signals, probes, even ambassadors, but there was never an answer. For generations, Earth was thought to be dead or forgotten, an empty cradle of a once promising species. The Galactic Council sometimes whispered of humanity, but only as a fading legend. To them, humans were ghosts of history, a race too fragile to survive the vast storms of the universe. The silence of Earth was considered proof that the death world had finally devoured its children. No one feared them. No one respected them. No one expected them to ever return. Yet silence has its own weight. It was not the silence of weakness nor the silence of surrender. It was the kind of silence that hides a shadow before it moves. The Council had always believed that silence meant absence, but they had never learned to fear silence as a choice. That mistake was about to change the galaxy forever. For centuries, other species expanded. They built empires of light that stretched across the dark. They fought wars, signed treaties, and reshaped the balance of power 1,000 times over. The universe was noisy with politics and war, with trade and ambition. In that noise, the absence of humanity felt like a hole in reality, but one so old and quiet that most stopped noticing. Earth was not gone, they said. It was irrelevant. They laughed at the myths of human ferocity told by a few surviving archives. They believed those stories belonged to a past age, not to the living present. Then a whisper broke the silence. It began as a signal, faint and almost forgotten, arriving from the edge of the Sol system. An alien listening post picked it up first. The signal carried no image, no complex message. Only a single word: prepare. The word burned through the minds of the watchers like a warning from a ghost. Reports spread fast. Council members dismissed it as a hoax. Pirates and scavengers claimed it was nothing more than interference. But those who studied the signal knew better. The code was ancient, but the structure was unmistakable. Human fear moved quietly through the corridors of power. If the humans were gone, how could they speak? If they had perished long ago, who had sent this word into the void? There were questions, and with them came unease. No one admitted it openly, but many remembered the old tales. Humanity, the predators of Earth, the Death World survivors, the species that looked at stars and chose to conquer distance. Scouts were sent to the edges of the Sol system. They expected ruins, the slow decay of a forgotten homeworld. Instead, they found something else. At first, it was only fragments, whispers of energy too vast to belong to a dying planet. The scouts reported shadows moving between planets, hidden structures that did not match known alien technology. The Council debated endlessly. Some argued Earth had been quietly enslaved by another empire. Others claimed humanity had never vanished, only hidden. But none had proof, and so the Council comforted itself with denial. Still, the word lingered. Prepare. It repeated itself across frequencies, sometimes faint, sometimes strong, as though the universe itself was breathing the message. Prepare. Worlds that once mocked humanity found themselves uneasy at night. Old veterans of ancient battles remembered stories of humans on distant frontiers. They spoke in hushed tones of warriors who fought with fire in their eyes and would rather die than surrender. If such beings had been silent all this time, what were they preparing for? And then the second sign appeared. An alien merchant vessel passing near the asteroid belt recorded a sight that shook its crew into silence. In the black void, a shadow moved against the stars, not like a single ship, but like a wall of metal. The vessel barely escaped with its logs, and when the images reached the Council, debates erupted into fear. The structure was immense, too large to be a station, too ordered to be natural. Some said it was an armada hidden in the dark. Others said it was impossible, that Earth could not have built such power without the galaxy noticing. But the silence had hidden more than anyone dared imagine. Within the Sol system, under the cover of centuries of secrecy, Earth had built something extraordinary. While the galaxy drowned itself in endless conflicts, humans had withdrawn, watching, learning, preparing. They had turned their Death World instincts not toward survival alone, but toward dominance. Where others shouted their power to the stars, humanity whispered its plans into silence. Every advance was hidden, every weapon concealed, every fleet built under shadows. And now, the silence was ending. No one knew when the first ships would emerge, or what they would demand. No one knew whether the Armada was coming to protect or to punish. All they had was the word that haunted every world that received the message. Prepare. Prepare for what? No one could answer. But every race in the galaxy felt the same unease. The silence was not empty. It was the breath before the storm. The long silence of Earth was over, and the galaxy would soon learn the price of mistaking quiet for weakness. The council chambers echoed with arguments, but beneath the noise there was something none of them wished to admit. It was fear, sharp and cold, crawling under every word. The images brought back from the edge of the Sol system could not be dismissed as illusions. They showed movement in the dark, shadows too precise to be natural, formations too vast to be dismissed as coincidence. The galaxy had grown used to laughing at humanity, but laughter dies when shadows begin to move. Rumors spread faster than light. In distant colonies, traders spoke of human ships larger than cities, covered in black armor that swallowed the stars. On mining stations, workers swore they had seen silent objects gliding across the void, objects that did not belong to any known empire. Entire worlds began to whisper the same question. What if humanity had never been weak at all? What if the silence was not defeat but patience? The word that echoed across channels returned again and again. Prepare. The single command haunted communication networks. At first, most thought it was a warning of invasion from some new power. But the code was human, ancient in its structure, undeniable in its origin. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy looked toward Earth with suspicion and unease. For the first time in living memory, silence felt heavier than war. The Council dispatched fleets toward Sol. They were not war fleets, but escorts for investigation. Each commander thought of themselves as brave, but none could shake the sense that they were walking into something older and colder than they understood. When the first ships crossed the threshold into human space, they found not ruins but shadows that moved with purpose. The scouts sent probes, but the probes never returned. They called out into the void, but the void gave no answer. Still, that one word pulsed faintly on their receivers. Prepare. In private chambers, counselors began to argue not about what to do, but about who would be the first target if humanity returned. Old records of human wars resurfaced, accounts of soldiers who fought beyond reason, who rose from ashes with eyes full of fire. There were testimonies from centuries ago, alien commanders admitting that humans were not the strongest but the most unwilling to break. Now those memories, once mocked, returned with the weight of prophecy. The galaxy had forgotten, but silence had not erased what humans were. It had only buried it deeper. The merchants were the first to panic. Entire trade routes bent away from Sol. Ships refused to pass near Earth's borders. Stations began hoarding supplies, fearing that if humans returned, their hunger would spread like fire. Armies that had once boasted of their victories over rivals now whispered of doom. Not from warlords or empires, but from a single species that had waited in darkness. The unease was contagious. Fear became its own form of invasion. On the capital world of the Council, one young delegate asked aloud the question none wanted to hear. Why had the humans stayed silent? If they had power, why not use it? If they had ships, why not trade them, boast of them, or threaten with them? The answer was silence again, but this silence was not human. It was the silence of every counselor staring into the hollow of their own ignorance. Because none of them knew, none of them had even thought to ask until it was too late. Then came the second signal. Unlike the first, this one carried not a single word but a sound. It was a low hum, steady and endless, like the breath of a machine larger than planets. Scientists studied it. They found within the hum a rhythm that matched no known technology, but pulsed with terrifying precision. Some said it was the sound of engines awakening. Others claimed it was a heartbeat, a reminder that something alive waited behind the walls of Earth. Entire stations refused to listen, fearing madness, but the hum spread anyway. Whispers turned into terror when small fleets sent to investigate simply vanished. No wreckage, no distress calls, only silence where hundreds of ships had been. Panic bloomed like fire across the Council worlds. Leaders tried to calm their people with promises that it was all misunderstanding, but their eyes betrayed the truth. They too feared the shadows gathering at Sol. They too dreamed of ships that blotted out stars. The galaxy had always seen Earth as weak because Earth had been quiet. Now they began to see the truth they had ignored. Silence is not weakness. Silence is watching. Silence is waiting. The old myths were true after all. Humanity was not gone. Humanity was awake, and every whisper carried the weight of something too vast to stop. When the merchant vessel carrying the third set of images arrived at the Council, No one could deny it anymore. The recording showed rows upon rows of warships, black and endless, their outlines lit only by the glow of distant stars. They did not move like fleets that practiced. They moved like fleets that had been waiting, patient and prepared. The Armada was real. Humanity was not silent anymore. The counselors who had once spoken of humans as a dead species could only stare into the recordings with pale faces. The silence of Earth had been a lie, and the galaxy was beginning to understand what it truly meant. And still, across all channels, the same word pulsed: prepare. The council fleets that drifted at the edges of the Sol system believed themselves strong. They came with banners raised, their ships gleaming with centuries of technology, their commanders proud and sure of their authority. They spoke of peace but prepared for war, for no alien commander wished to look weak before a race that might be stirring in the dark. Yet when their vessels slipped deeper into the system, when their sensors touched the shadows that stretched beyond Mars, their certainty began to crumble. The silence was no longer passive. It pressed against them heavy and alive, as if the very void carried human eyes. The first sign came without warning. An alien cruiser, proud and ancient, vanished from every scan. One instant it was there, its shields bright, its engines burning blue. The next, nothing remained. No explosion. No debris, no signal, just silence. Panic rippled through the fleet, but their commanders ordered them steady. They spoke into the darkness, demanding answers, declaring themselves ambassadors of peace, claiming no harm was intended. The void answered with light. A shape emerged, vast and black, sliding across the starfield like a shadow given form. It dwarfed their cruisers, its hull layered with armor that seemed to swallow every ray of starlight. Across its surface, faint lines glowed, not in alien colors but in sharp, simple white. The council fleet trembled as the first human warship stepped out of hiding. Then another followed. Then another. One by one they appeared, until the stars themselves seemed to vanish behind a wall of steel. The alien commanders had prepared their speeches, but their words died in their throats. They were not looking at ships. They were looking at judgment. The silence of Earth had not been an accident. It had been the silence of hunters waiting in tall grass. The Armada moved as one. No hesitation, no confusion, only unity. Their formations were flawless, their movements sharp as blades. The council fleets, despite centuries of training, looked clumsy in comparison. Some captains froze. Others shouted orders to retreat. The void vibrated with fear as their ships scattered, but scattering made them prey. The humans spoke at last. A single broadcast struck every vessel at once, spoken in 100 alien tongues, carried in a voice that was cold and merciless. You ignored our silence. Now you will hear our voice. The message broke every last doubt. The silence had been a choice, and the voice was war. The first strike fell upon the lead destroyer of the council. It was not fire, not missiles, not beams of light, but something far worse. A pulse of energy rippled through space, unseen but felt. The destroyer split in half without a sound, its crew vanishing before they could even scream. The rest of the fleet fired in panic, missiles and plasma lashing against the void. Yet when their weapons touched the human wall, they dissolved into nothing, swallowed by shields no scientist had ever imagined. For every alien ship that fired, 3 fell. Human weapons were not noisy or chaotic. They were precise, each strike cutting through the void with terrifying calm. It was not war. It was extermination. The council fleets, once proud, now begged for mercy in frantic signals. But no reply came. The humans moved forward, silent and relentless, their armada advancing like a tide of iron. The council commanders argued among themselves. Some demanded they stay, that surrender might earn mercy. Others ordered retreat, but retreat was no safer. Those who fled were tracked, their engines ripped apart by unseen blasts. Those who stayed were erased, their ships turning into burning fragments within seconds. No choice was a choice. The humans did not ask for surrender. They did not pause. In the council chamber light years away, leaders watched in horror as live feeds arrived. Entire fleets, their pride and defense, were vanishing before their eyes. Not slowly, not after hours of war, but within minutes. Every image carried the same nightmare. Walls of human ships advancing, black hulls glimmering faintly as alien fire washed off them like rain against stone. No one could believe it. For centuries, humanity had been silent, forgotten, irrelevant. Now silence had become the most terrifying weapon the galaxy had ever known. On planets far from the battle, ordinary aliens crowded around hollow screens and transmissions. They saw ships crumble, They saw fire devour their defenders. They heard the single human broadcast echo again and again. You ignored our silence. Now you will hear our voice. Mothers clutched their children. Elders prayed. Warriors stared into the distance, their courage drained by the realization that there was nothing to fight. And yet, amid the destruction, there was no laughter, no joy in the human onslaught. Their silence was not broken by celebration or arrogance. It was broken only by fire. The humans spoke not to boast, but to announce that silence had ended. To the galaxy, this was worse than arrogance. It meant they were not seeking recognition. They were seeking something deeper, something far more dangerous. The survivors of the Council fleet scattered into the void, their signals crying out to the capital for guidance. But what guidance could there be? The humans had returned, and they had not returned as a broken race in need of allies. They had returned as masters of war. The Sol system was no longer silent. It was awake, and every alien who had ever doubted, mocked, or ignored humanity now understood their mistake. When the last alien ship vanished from human sensors, silence fell again, but it was no longer the silence of mystery. It was the silence of fear. Behind that silence waited the Armada, a force built in shadows, forged in patience, and unleashed without hesitation. The galaxy would never hear silence the same way again. The destruction of the Council fleet spread across the galaxy like a storm, breaking through glass. Every world, every station, every colony replayed the same recordings again and again. They watched ships that had once been called invincible shatter like dust before the silent wall of humanity. They heard the broadcast that had struck every receiver at once, the words that burned into memory. You ignored our silence. Now you will hear our voice. For the first time in living history, the galaxy trembled not before a vast empire or an ancient predator, but before a world they had all thought irrelevant. Earth had returned, and it had not returned alone. It had returned with its greatest armada. Across the Sol system, the Armada began to move. It was not a single fleet, but a living storm of steel, thousands of ships sliding from hidden docks and shadowed bases. Their hulls were dark, their weapons hidden until the moment they fired, their formations exact as though choreographed by one mind. The galaxy had seen great fleets before, but never anything like this. Armadas of old were proud displays of power, glowing with banners, drowning the stars with signals of authority. The human armada carried no banners, no music, no speeches. Its silence was its identity. The silence was louder than any declaration. Alien spies who had survived long enough to witness the awakening of the armada carried back whispers of terror. They described carriers the size of small moons, frigates moving like predators through the dark war machines that operated as though every ship shared the same thought. They told of strange weapons, invisible until they fired. Weapons that bent light itself and silenced enemies before alarms could sound. Those who heard these reports believed them to be exaggerations, until more images arrived, more fragments of truth that left no room for denial. Humanity had hidden in silence, but it had not been idle. The Armada did not move blindly. It moved with direction. Its first strikes fell upon the species that had risen in humanity's absence, predators who had enslaved weaker worlds and grown fat on war. In systems that once belonged to peaceful colonies, enslaved races looked up at the skies and saw black ships descending like a tide of night. At first they thought it was another conqueror come to claim them, but then the chains broke. The oppressors screamed as their ships burned, their armies dissolved in fire. Humanity offered no speeches of freedom, no proclamations of justice. They simply erased the tyrants and left silence behind. For the oppressed, the silence became a strange kind of hope. For the rulers, it was terror. Where the Armada moved, no enemy remained. Where it struck, the galaxy was forced to watch. There was no negotiation, no attempt at peace. The Armada cut through empires that had thought themselves unshakable, and each time the message followed. You ignored our silence. Now you will hear our voice. The Council tried to gather strength. They called on every ally, every empire, every fleet still capable of fighting. Meetings stretched through sleepless nights, voices rising in panic. Some demanded they surrender at once, though they did not know how. Others begged to strike first, to show that the galaxy was not helpless before one species. But deep down, none of them believed it. They had seen the feeds, the recordings, the raw truth. Humanity did not move as a people who sought allies. Humanity moved as a force of judgment. Still, the Council dared one last hope. They sent envoys, small ships flying the banners of peace carrying messages written in every known tongue. They begged for dialogue, for negotiation, for understanding. They never returned. The Armada swallowed them whole, leaving behind only silence. To the Council, it was a message as clear as words. Humanity would not speak with them. Humanity would only act. Fear spread like infection. On distant worlds, civilians whispered that the Armada would not stop until it reached the Council itself. Entire populations began to panic, fleeing from border systems, abandoning colonies, rushing toward the center of power that had always been their safety. Yet even the capital no longer felt safe. The very thought of silence was enough to send shivers down spines. Children woke crying at night, convinced they had heard the hum of engines in the sky. Old soldiers remembered battles fought against desperate human soldiers centuries ago, and they knew this was no myth. This was what had been waiting in the silence all along. The Armada did not slow. It did not scatter. It moved with the calm inevitability of a storm. Planets that resisted burned. Planets that surrendered were passed by, left in silence but alive, as if humanity was choosing what mattered and what did not. Scholars tried to read meaning into their movements. Was this conquest or cleansing? Was it vengeance or something worse? The truth was hidden as the Armada had been all those years. Silence had concealed them before, and silence still concealed their purpose. On the Council capital, one elder leader finally spoke aloud the truth the others feared. Humanity had not returned for alliance or for empire. They had returned to reshape the galaxy itself, not through endless debate or fragile treaties, but through force. Through silence and fire, the Armada reached the halfway point between Sol and the Council. Entire fleets sent to intercept were torn apart in minutes. The broadcasts grew louder. You ignored our silence. Now you will hear our voice. The words echoed across worlds like the tolling of a bell, the final warning before judgment. No one could stop it. No one could hide. The Armada was not just warships. It was the silence of Earth transformed into motion, and it was coming closer with every breath. The Council capital world had never known fear like this. Its skies were filled with defensive fleets, its surface lined with weapons that had not fired in centuries, its leaders hidden in chambers deep beneath the Earth. For generations, they had been the voice of the galaxy, the arbiters of law and power. Now their voices were thin, breaking under the weight of silence that pressed down on them from the stars. The Armada was coming, and no barrier would hold it back. Every world that had tried to stand had fallen. Every fleet that had dared resist had been reduced to drifting wreckage. The message never changed. You ignored our silence. Now you will hear our voice. It had become more than a warning. It was a judgment, repeated like a sentence carved into the bones of the galaxy. And now that sentence was approaching the Council itself. The first shadows appeared in the outer sectors of the capital system. Vast black ships sliding into position, their hulls gleaming faintly as they blotted out the stars. At first there were a dozen, then 100, then thousands. They moved with calm precision, forming a wall around the system, cutting off every escape. No signals, no negotiations, no demands, only the quiet shape of inevitability. The Council watched in horror as their fleets scrambled to meet them, but the outcome was already known. Within minutes, the defenders were erased. Not broken, not scattered, erased as if they had never been. Across the capital world, billions of eyes turned to the skies. They saw the black hulls descending in perfect order. They felt the silence pressing against their hearts like a weight. Parents clutched their children. Warriors gripped their weapons, though they knew they were useless. Leaders buried their faces in their hands. The silence was everywhere, alive and merciless. Humanity had returned, and it was not the fragile race the Council had mocked. It was a storm that had hidden for centuries, a storm that no one had believed could exist. At last, a single signal broke through the void. It was not a fleet-wide broadcast, not a threat hurled across channels. It was a quiet transmission, directed at the Council chamber alone. A voice spoke, calm and steady, in a language so old that many had forgotten it. We are humanity. We were silent because we were not ready. We were silent because the galaxy was not ready. But now the silence is over. The Council chamber froze. No one dared reply, but the transmission did not wait for their answer. Instead, a single vessel descended toward the surface, a warship larger than any structure on the capital world. It settled above the city like a shadow, its presence turning daylight into night. From its hull, a smaller craft broke away, sleek and silent, gliding down toward the council. Soldiers surrounded the landing site, their weapons trembling in their hands. Yet when the craft touched the ground, no one moved. The silence itself forbade them. From the craft stepped a figure, a human. He was tall, armored in dark steel, his eyes sharp as blades. He carried no weapon, but the silence around him was heavier than any army. The counselors stared, their bodies rigid with fear. Here in flesh and blood was the ghost of a species they had declared gone. Here was the truth of the silence. The envoy spoke without raising his voice. Earth had watched. Earth had prepared. While the galaxy drowned itself in endless wars and fragile treaties, humanity had chosen silence. Silence to build, silence to learn, silence to remember what it meant to be forged on a death world. They had not disappeared. They had not surrendered. They had waited. And now the waiting was done. One counselor dared to ask what they wanted. The envoy's gaze did not waver. Humanity does not want, humanity decides. We return not as beggars, not as servants, not as partners. We return as ourselves. The words were final, simple, and heavy as iron. The council chamber erupted in panic, some crying for mercy, others shouting for negotiation. But the human did not move. He did not raise his voice. He let the silence speak for him. The silence that had hidden fleets, the silence that had devoured empires, the silence that had returned to claim its place. Above the capital, the Armada remained still. Not firing, not advancing, only waiting. The galaxy realized with horror that this was not conquest as they understood it. This was something deeper. Humanity was not here to rule by force alone. Humanity was here to remind the galaxy that silence is not weakness. Silence is strength contained, strength held back until the right moment. And now that moment had come. The envoy turned and left the chamber. He offered no treaty, no terms, no promises. His message was complete. Humanity had returned, and that truth alone was enough to reshape the galaxy forever. The counselors sank into silence themselves, unable to speak, because they finally understood. The silence of Earth had never been absence. It had been the breath before the storm. As the envoy's craft lifted into the sky, the Armada shifted into new formations, stretching across the heavens like a wall of night. The message pulsed one final time, echoing across every world, every station, every ship in the galaxy. You ignored our silence. Now you will hear our voice, and the galaxy did.